All right, I want you to turn to Philippians chapter 4 this morning. And I need to set the stage for where I'm going. First of all, as soon as I say Philippians, you know that I'm not preaching from a parable this morning. Now, I hope to get back to it, but every now and then, as I read a new translation of the Bible, I discover that the new translators have put a verse in that didn't used to be there. That there are verses that weren't in the Bible last week, or 2 weeks ago, or a month ago. Because I've read it through many times, and these verses weren't there. And this time I read them and I think, whoa, when did they put that in? What translator sneaked that verse in? And now here it is. So this is one of those verses that I was reading along a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, wow, I never noticed that before. I've preached from Philippians many, many times. I've got one sermon from Philippians that I've preached 20 times. My kids can preach it. And so, I'm no stranger to the book. I know the book well. But now let me tell you another thing that lays in the background here today. I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky, have fun, do it kind of guy. I enjoy where I'm at. I enjoy what I'm doing. I was in Florida a couple of days this week. Took one of those airboat rides out through the swamps. Alligators everywhere. Bald eagles flying over, and I'm doing my Dave Mahan thing. I'm just laying back worshiping God in the sun. Thinking, wow, nature is beautiful. I love what God's done here. And then after that, I go to Tony Roma's and get a rack of ribs. I can worship at the dinner plate too. I mean, if you can worship at the foot of an oak tree, you can worship at the foot of a plate of ribs. And so I'm just having a grand time. That's the kind of guy I am. I enjoy whatever I'm doing till I come to church. And when I come to church, I become this negative nabob guy. I become this guy who, that you've all got assigned seats, don't you? And when I pray for this church, I pray for you by pew and by seat. So when you mess me up, if you don't get prayed for that week because you're in the wrong seat, that's on you. That's not on me. But when I get down to pray, I think, oh, they weren't there this week. You know what? That makes 2 out of the last 3 weeks they've not been there. You know what? I bet they're looking for another church. I bet they're mad at me. I bet I've said something to them that made them mad. And I miss every person every time they're gone. And every time I hear a crossword, somebody says something like, well, so-and-so made me mad last week. I think, oh, this could be the beginning of such trouble. I'm a worrier in church. I worry about, when Joe and Kelly Brown came to me and said they were moving to Walton. Oh, no. If Joe and Kelly get down there and start church hunting, man, that's a long way to drive. Not as far as you guys come, but, I'm the guy who immediately starts thinking, oh, no, I don't want to lose Joe and Kelly Brown. Maybe Joe, but I don't want to lose Joe and Kelly Brown. I'm just one of those guys when I get to church. I know all about that. And I notice that some of you are too. Back in the summer, you'll remember this, I bought a bright, shiny red BMW convertible. Looks brand new. Now, it's not. It's old. You guys know what you pay me. I can't afford a new car. But it's an old used convertible, but I'm tickled to death with it. So one of you, I got in it one day and we went out for a ride. Now the car's 10 years old. Been in Miami for 10 years. And one of you sat there and looked over at me and said, "Oh look, it's got a rock chip in the windshield." You know, that rock chip will eventually spread and it'll shatter that whole windshield and you won't be able to see where you're going. I thought, shut up. You know. Okay, I will. She said, watch my language, by the way. So, that got me thinking about a crack in the windshield. You know, it's one of those little things, but if you don't look out, you go down the road 70, 75, 80 miles an hour for a while, that little rock chip will start to spread and pretty soon it will shatter. And so that's in the back of my mind as I'm reading this time. And I will tell you, unashamedly, one of the things I'm proudest of in this church right now is there is such a good sense of unity. I don't know how you could be in a better sense of unity in a church that's almost 200 years old. There is a real sense of unification in this church. I believe if you go to the folks who have been here a long time, they'll tell you that's one of the biggest changes in the church, is there is a real sense of unity in the church. Carol made me think this morning, talking about her sister being thrown out of the nursing home, of a story about an elderly couple. They were in a nursing home together. They'd been married 60 years. But those 60 years, they were always fighting. And it kept on going in the nursing home. They would yell, they would scream, they would argue, they would disagree all day. And finally the home came to them and said, "We're going to throw you out if you don't knock this stuff off." Well, being who they were, they couldn't agree what to do about getting thrown out of the nursing home. They'd always been good Christians. They'd always gone to church. They'd always believed in the power of prayer. And finally the wife came to the husband and said, "Now listen, Joe." I just made that part up, Joe. Said, "Now listen, Joe. I'll tell you what, let's do. Since we can't get along in this nursing home and we're going to have to move, let's just pray that one of us dies. And 2 or 3 weeks after the funeral, I'll move in with my sister." Well, that's how a lot of people solve their problems. That's how a lot of churches solve their problems. And I don't care what situation you're in. I don't care if you're talking about school or work or business or whatever. Sometimes getting along is tough. You know, tripping in athletics and baseball and soccer and football, they call it chemistry. You got not to just have the best 9 players on the baseball field or 10, but you got to have the right chemistry. There's got to be some sense of unity in it. And my logic tells me that if a baseball team or a football team needs chemistry, then a church needs chemistry. And so it's important that we get our chemistry right. The best of churches have struggles. As long as people are involved, there's going to be trouble. As long as people are involved, there's going to be struggles. I've looked for a way to have church without any people, but I haven't found anything like that yet. And the fact is just, folks, that sometimes people can be a little prickly, you know. Sometimes people can be rubbed wrong. Sometimes there's a crack in the windshield. And you don't think it's much. Now, I'm still driving that BMW and it's got 3 rock chips in it. And they don't bother me. I just go on with it. But I'm here to say that as a church, disunity will slow us down. It'll keep us from getting where God means for us to go. Now, all that brings me to the church at Philippi. Man, I hope you know about this church. It is a great church. Paul says, I thank God every time I think of you. Wouldn't that be a good thing to be said about a church? Somebody goes off, they move away, and every time they think of Sandrun, it's a pleasant thought, and they thank God for us. Paul said they were a reward to him. Think about it. He says, I've worked hard all my life, and the pay you gave me was I got to be a pastor in the church at Philippi. You are a jewel in my crown, a jewel in my ministerial cap. They were good financially. They loved to give. They loved to minister. They loved to reach people. They were theologically sound. They got their doctrine right. They weren't little babies. They loved everybody. It was a great, great church. It's the kind of church that if you put up a sign that you were without a pastor, resumes would come in from everywhere. Everybody would want a pastor, but it's not a perfect church. I got to tell you folks, there's no such thing. Not then, not now. No perfect churches. Just not going to happen. You know, I saw a church the other day you can join online. Now, I always said, you know, if I'm going to watch a video when I go to church, just send me the DVD. I'll watch it without getting up so early on Sunday morning. So I'm okay. I don't care if that's how you choose to worship. That's between you and God. But now, if you send them an email that you watched their service this morning, you're a member. So now they get to brag about how many new members they got. Except they're all sitting home on the couch under a blanket. But you know what I mean. So there are no perfect churches. And if you find one, let me just ask you, do them a favor and don't join. Don't attend. Just come on back here. You know, because don't mess up what they got going. They got a good thing going on. Don't mess with it. Don't fool with it. So it is a crack in the windshield when disunity shows up. There is negative potential. Do you know that Solomon said in the Bible, one sinner can destroy a whole lot of good. Little insignificant things have the potential to ruin. We all know it takes less time to tear it down than it does to set it up, don't we? You know, you want to set up for trunk or treat, you got to get here pretty early. Comes tear down time, it's pretty fast. Everybody's done and out of here. One person said it's easier to cause a stink than it is to create sweetness. Well, so Paul here is writing along to this wonderful church. He's got so many good things. Then he comes to chapter 4, and listen to what he does. It just knocked my socks off. I couldn't hardly believe it when I read it. Chapter 4, verse 1. So therefore, brother, you know, in light of everything I've said, therefore, ones that I love and ones that I long to see again, my joy and my crown, stand fast, stand firm in the Lord. And I beg Euodias and Syntyche that they might get of the same mind in the Lord. And I beg you also, true yokefellow, help those women. They labored with me in the gospel and with Clement and with other laborers whose names are in the book of life. Do you see what Paul did right there? Paul not only said there's two women in church not getting along. So you got a great church, but there's two old women. Well, no, he didn't say old. I made that part up. He said there's two women who aren't getting along. And of all things, he called them out by name. My goodness. You get ready to do that today in the church, you better be ready to go. Not just go as pastor. You better be ready to go to heaven. Because they're liable to come after you. He called these two women out and said, I beg that they might get along. And he called them out by name. Now, if I was Paul and I was going to call out some big negative nabob in the church, I could see things. What if they got their doctrine wrong? What if somebody was being immoral? What if the minister had gone off the deep end? You know, that happens sometimes. What if they had stopped evangelizing? What if they were losing? What if the money wasn't coming in? I could see all those things, but of all things, Paul calls out this crack in the windshield. He said there's two women who had a falling out, and he called them by name and put their name in the Bible. Holy cow. Can you imagine standing up in church someday and saying, now, I have to watch where I point here. Say, now you two need to get along, and I'm going to put your name in the Bible that you were not getting along. Paul saw that as a big enough deal to call their name. I begged them that they might get along, and I'm going to call them out by name. I got an idea. When we have a little bit of hatefulness in the church, you know, a little bit of that negativity, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like Brother Larry preaches too long, I don't like the way Brother Larry wears his hair. Hey, by the way, I got a haircut yesterday, got for half price. That's the truth. That's the truth. She got done, she said, I can't charge you full price for that. So give me $6 and go home. I said, okay, that's a deal, lady. You know, all those people, let's start putting it in the bulletin. When you come in next Sunday, we'll have a section. It'll be like a prayer list. It'll be like a prayer list, and we call it careful what you're. We call it a grumpy list. And now I'm not picking on women. That's just who Paul happened to mention. But what if I got a better idea. CJ. We'll start putting it up here. All right? This week's grumbler list. And we'll list them. We'll list them by name. And we'll keep them on there for a while. And we'll say, now, don't mess around with this person because she's really grumpy this week. Don't mess around with this guy. He lost his job last week. But Paul said that they endanger the unity of the church because they can't play well with others. You know, they don't get along on the sandbox. They don't get along on the playground. Do you know, I'm going to just tell you folks, this is my experience in the Baptist church. I have known hundreds of people in Baptist churches who had great ideas and who did a great job. And they thought, I'm going to be a leader. But you know what? Ain't nobody will work with you. You can lead all you want as long as it's just you. Ain't nobody will cooperate with you. Ain't nobody will put up with it. Ain't nobody will get along with it. And so, now my opinion is, this is Larry telling God what to do. My opinion is that we probably ought not to call them out by name. Even though Paul does. It's a funny thing to me. Ken and Brenda, maybe Leah will remember this. We still have words from the church I pastored before here. We still have names that mean certain things in my family. Because that's how people were in church. We had a lady in church who was blind. Her name was Dot Hoffman. I've never seen a bigger warrior in my life. So we'd take a bus trip. And we took a lot of bus trips. We'd take a bus trip and she'd sit right behind me and I'm driving. And I would just casually, I'd get down to a quarter of a tank, which means on a Greyhound, I can only go 250 more miles. And I'd say, I need to start looking for a gas station. And then about every 30 seconds, Doc would say, see a gas station here? No. 30 seconds go by. Find a gas station yet? No. 30 more seconds. Find a gas station yet? So pretty soon learn, don't tell her. Pretty soon learn, just shut up. Whoops, I'm sorry. I pretty soon learn, just don't even mention it. Just don't even bring it up. And now we still, as we're going down the road, somebody will say something and one of us will say, oh, welcome to the trip, Doc Hoffman. And everybody knows what we're talking about and what we're doing. So in this wonderful, great church, Paul began to sense a little division. And he said very clearly, he said, stop it. He said, I love you all. You're the jewel in my crown, but stop it. Knock it off. Folks, do you understand that the world is against us? Do you know when you... I don't know, unless you just don't watch the TV anymore, you have to understand Christianity is under attack, don't you? And it doesn't just mean Christianity as a whole group. It's not just church. It's you. You are under attack. Go to high school and try to be a Christian. Go to college and try to be a Christian. Go to work and try to stand up for the Lord. Get on Facebook and tell them what you really think. Just be honest on there. Tell them. The world is fighting against us. The last thing in the world we need is to fight each other. The enemy is there. We don't have any enemies in here. We're brothers and sisters in Christ in here. We love one another in here. The world is trying to keep you from growing. What we want to do is help you grow. We want to say to you, stand firm, stay in the fight, be united. The world is battering the church. And understand, folks, these two ladies weren't evil. Paul says they were good workers. Paul says they weren't enemies of the church. They weren't immoral. They weren't heretics. They were members of that church. They'd worked hard. They believed what they were doing was right. They thought it was in their best interest. They thought they knew best, and that meant they thought if it was good for them, it had to be good for you. No, it don't. Paul said that the unity of the church is more important than anything else we're fighting. Wow. You know, these women didn't sit up nights thinking about, how can I be nasty to Brother Levy tomorrow? They were pillars of the church. You see it in church, don't you? How many of you been in church a long time? Most of you? So without raising, I don't care if we do raise hands. How many of you have seen people get territorial with their ministry? It's like, I own this, don't you mess with it. You know what? Let me ask you this. How many of you have seen somebody in a Baptist church get territorial about a table or a chair? Holy cow, folks. We're gonna fight inside the church. You know, Debbie DeRozier, 3 or 4 weeks ago before homecoming, got busy about getting the hallway painted. The first thing I heard was, you picked this color. Oh no, it wasn't you, and I'm glad it wasn't. Get out of my face. You know, I'm telling you, now I'm not, please understand folks, I'm not saying I sense disunity in the church. That's not the case. What I want us to glean and gather here today is that there is nothing you do in this church more important than contribute to the sense of unification. We're on the same trip here. We're on the same journey. We're on the same mission. We've got the same purpose. We want to tell people that God loves them, God will forgive them, God will save them, God will bring them into the fellowship, God will bring them into the ministry, and God will move us then to speak to the next crowd. And we don't really need to be fooling around with whose jobs, who's picking colors, who's doing this, who's doing that. Paul said, tell them to sit down and hush. Take Brooklyn to Paul, so you can tell him to watch his language. Paul said there's nothing we do more important. I've watched people in Baptist churches get territorial over a Sunday school room. Do you really think it matters which room your Sunday school class meets in? In our room this morning, we've got those little plastic chairs that are folded up too narrow that you can sit in. Makes me think Edgar got here to church last week. He pulled in, he got out of his car, and he looked over at me and said, "I see what you mean about these parking spaces being too little." Oh yeah. Well, we've got those chairs, and then we've also got the blue padded chairs that you can sit on. So I go in, and nobody wants those blue plastic chairs. They all want the other ones. There are people who argue over which chair are we going to use. Which room do we get to meet in? You know what, folks? You don't own the room. You don't own the table. You don't own the chair. I know it's going to be a shock for you, but you don't even own your assigned seat in worship service. They're all the same. And that all leads to pride, and pride leads to jealousy, and pretty soon it's a war. How many of you are old enough to remember the Cold War? Nobody? Jim, Charlotte, handful. Ken is, Brenda ain't. Yeah. Well, in the Cold War, U.S. and Russia were horrible enemies. But there never was a shot fired. They wouldn't speak to each other. It was just tension, and it was tension every day. I mean, you worried every day about, is there going to be a nuclear bomb today that hits America? Is there going to be a nuclear bomb? Who's going to shoot the first one? I've seen Cold Wars in church. They don't speak to each other. One of them will sit right here, one of them will sit right here, and they're very careful not to look over. Trying to watch, make sure you ain't doing nothing they can go home and complain about. But they don't talk to each other. There's not a word said. And you know, sometimes that division is not even about the ministry. Sometimes it's about things out in the community. When Sarah was way too young to meet a boy, she had a little boyfriend over in Campbell County. His name was Jeff. And Tim came along and broke Jeff and Sarah up. And Sarah started going out with Tim. Jeff's mother got mad at him. What? You got mad at me because my kid didn't date your kid? Is that really what happened here? And by the way, just for what it's worth, Jeff and his wife are Tim and Sarah's neighbors in Thornwalk. I love it. You know, I've seen churches get division because their kids don't get along. I've seen it because you forgot to shake my hand this morning. Maybe you did a job outside church and didn't get along. Maybe you had an Avon party and you didn't invite me. You better have a good explanation. Or maybe I did invite you and you didn't come. You better have a good explanation for that. Wouldn't be Avon anymore probably though, would it? It'd be a 31 party now. Or a Lulu Row party now. And you didn't invite me. Folks, I need some Lulu Rows. Make them in spandex. You know, how many times the fights are about things that are nothing. You know, it's not a big doctrinal problem. I'm not saying ignore big doctrinal problems or ignore big moral problems, but it just has the potential to be a crack in the windshield. And I'm going to hush here. But let me tell you a secret. There ain't no secrets. You know that, don't you? You go home, you say in front of your wife, "Man, John, I ain't mad today." She's maybe talk in front of the kids. You think those kids are suddenly deaf when you get home and get around the table? You think they're deaf when you start saying, "Can't believe what Brother said this morning." They hear that. You think they don't go to school and tell somebody? Oh, man. That's why I sent my kids to Catholic school, so they wouldn't know none of y'all. You couldn't gossip with you. You know what, folks? Just that little rock chip, you know? Just that little crack in the windshield. Two women on the train, getting where they're going as they go along, they start arguing over the window. One of them says, if you put that window up, I'm going to die of pneumonia. The other one says, if you put that window down, I'm going to suffocate to death. And they start the argument. I'm going to die, I'm going to suffocate. I'm going to die, I'm going to suffocate. Finally, one of the other women says, well, let's keep it up till you die of pneumonia, and then put it down till you die with suffocation, and then the rest of us can enjoy the trip. So what we need, folks, I'm just telling you, you don't fix these things by throwing people out of church or anything like that. Let me tell you this. In this church today, I'm with my family. I'm with my brothers and my sisters in Christ. Every last single one of y'all. And I believe we're put here on purpose. I believe I'm here to pastor on purpose. I believe you're here today on purpose. I believe you're a part of Sandrun Baptist Church on purpose. And Paul said our unity is in the Lord, and it's shaped by the message of the gospel. And we all, including me, need to understand that our church unity is more important than our idea. Now, I'm not telling you that I think there's disunity in the church. I don't. I think this church is doing wonderfully as unification goes. I particularly think it's doing wonderfully as compared to what its history has been. I'm proud of this church. But as I was reading Philippians, and I came to this new verse where Paul said, you tell them to women to sit down and hush. I thought, I never realized Paul loved that church. But it said, don't let the crack in the windshield get started. Don't let it get a foot. I love that. Now, I don't know that I'd have the nerve to call them out by name. But I love that Paul said, tell them they got to start getting along so that the church can go on and be about its business. So I invite you today, think this through just for a minute. We're going to say, you need a good place to go to church. You need a good place to say, that's my church. I've said to you many times, when I grew up, we called it belong. Every community had a church. And you'd run into somebody that you hadn't seen in a while, and they'd say to you, now, do you go to church? And you'd say, yeah. They'd say, now, where do you belong? I always liked that concept. It's not just my membership. It's where I belong. It's where I believe God brings me. You need a good place to go to church. We got a good one. We got one that when the crack in the windshield starts, we fix it. I'm not worried about that stuff. I'm not going to fight over that little stuff. We're not going to try to make it our way or the highway. It's not who we are. You need a place to worship the Lord. Come here, worship here. Be part of this church. Now, we're not perfect. You know? If we were, we wouldn't be after you join. So, you know, you're going to see things you don't like. Sure. Going to be days you like the music better than other days. Sure. Going to be days you like the preaching better than other days. Sure, there's days I like the preaching better than other days. You know, there are days I go home and think, I preached a good sermon. There are days I go home and think, you're going to put more time in more. You know. Sure. Man, it's a good place to worship God. I invite you today to just, first of all, some of you may have cracks in the windshield that you need to fix. If you need to just walk over to somebody and, you know what, let me tell you a secret. Let me tell you a fact. When you get ready to fix a crack in the windshield, it doesn't have to be a big production. You don't have to go over and hug and cry and say, oh, I'm sorry that I've been mad at you. I love you so much and just forgive me for what I've done. You don't have to do all that stuff. Do it if you want to, but you don't have to do all that junk, all that drama. That's probably what got you in the spot you're in. You know what you can do? When you pass them in the hallway when church is over, just say, hi, Charlotte, good to see you, and walk on. And suddenly Charlotte knows Cold War's over. Cold War's ended. You see, you don't have to do a thing. You just have to maybe walk by and just say, hey, good to see you today, and walk on. And he'll know that Cold War's done. I invite you to fix those things. If it's today or next week. I don't even know if there are any of those things. If you're mad at me, come and ask me, I'll forgive you. And just in case the line starts on this side. Man, I hope everybody knows how important unity is in the church. How much it matters. How we're going to win people to Christ if we shoot each other. How are you going to win people to Christ if you go into work and the first thing you say is, and church made me mad yesterday. How are you going to invite them to come? Okay, I'm done. I just keep talking. We're going to stand and sing. I invite you to come today. Just say, let's stand together. Say this word, God put me. Maybe there's a crack in the windshield you want to resolve right now that you're going to fix. Let's sing, you come.